All right. Hello, everybody. Today I'm here with my friend Eric Fisher. Eric is someone who sets visions for himself and follows through. As he told me a moment ago, he's somebody who worked at a number of big tech companies earlier in his life, built his own tech platform, built his own house, bought houses, teaches improv, has explored awakening, and currently has a house/retreat center in Boulder where facilitators host different types of workshops and events. I believe he also has a farm. So, Eric, welcome to the show. Great to have you.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So I thought we could start with your story. To me, you have a very fascinating story. I just touched on a few pieces of it. Would you be open to tell us a concise version of your life story?
Sure. Let me just ask ChatGPT to summarize. What- um, yeah. The general gist is that I uh, was an architecture enthusiast and improv acting enthusiast as a kid. Saw that there was going to be no money in it. Decided that I wanted to optimize for the freest life I could muster for myself. Switched into computer graphics, ended up working at all the big tech companies in Silicon Valley, got really dispirited with how unemotionally mature they all were and without a vision for humanity, just building stuff because they could. And then left to explore like what life really was. And in that process, like discovered and opened to therapy and spirituality and psychedelics, and ended up by a twist of fate coming back around and being able to go back into architecture and design and build the house that I'm in now, and then also buy some other houses. So we have like this modern commune that's composed of four homes on many acres, but they're not all on the same land. But each house is rented by friends who are also mindful facilitators. And here we are in this weird new reality where I still run my tech platform for our family business, but then I host facilitators who are hosting medicine events. And yeah, lately I've been deep diving now into like what's next as I'm about to turn 39 and thinking about how the next maybe 40 or 50 years would be more life defining than the previous time, which is just wild to think about. Like I could be 80 and look back and be like, oh yeah, those years before I was 40. Yeah, I kind of forget what that was like. So it's a potent adult space to be in at this point.
Yeah, that is potent. You mentioned psychedelics. I'm curious what role have psychedelics played in your process and what's been your most powerful psychedelic experience?
So I started smoking cannabis when I got out to Silicon Valley. I was actually working at Apple, and some like older managers were talking about cannabis at the time, and I was like, "Can you talk about this?" And they're like, "Eric, how do you think the iPhone was invented?" And I'm like, "Oh, what?" So suddenly it became this from this taboo thing to like actually like all the cool people smoke. And then I did a deep dive, and it was fun for a while, but it wasn't until like a few years later that I started to take it seriously of like, wait a minute, cannabis is doing something like to me. Like I feel differently and I think differently and I prefer how it's working for me. So that started this journey of even telling my parents like, hey, I'm going to be smoking this weed. I hope you guys are okay with it because I want to hang out with you, but like this is the journey I'm on. And then they said to me, oh, do you want to try some of our stuff? We have, I think upstairs on the box, we have some. So that was that. But then Burning Man 2013, my first time doing MDMA, and it was incredible. I could not believe I was scared of all psychedelics for years, as per the conditioning. And a good friend of mine who went to MIT was doing psychedelics at Burning Man, and I was like, "Aren't you worried about ruining your brain?" And he like leaned in and said, "Eric, if you have a brain, you can do psychedelics." What? So I did MDMA, and I truly had never felt that good in my whole life. Like, and it wasn't even like being on a drug. It was just well-being, period. Like I felt light, I felt happy, I felt open, I felt unburdened by some of the, I don't know, the weights of the world. and I was like alive and able to participate, which coming from a very cerebral, logical, computer sciencey kind of situation was very liberating. So that's been the most important, I think. I only did it once, then I waited a year, did it again, then I waited a year and I did it again. And then after that, I was able to do it at home at my mom's house. Not at Burning Man, like not at a rave kind of thing. And just sitting like in our living room. And I was amazed at how that experience went because I was just home, like where I'd been since childhood. And my mom's like cooking in the kitchen and she's like yelling with my stepdad. And I'm filled with this like love and well-being, like at home. And that's when I thought it was like really powerful to not to do psychedelics like in a whole crazy setting of like, well, we're going to a rave, we're going to Burning Man, we're going to the jungle, but just like home in your room with people as this casual thing. And that ended up being the big motivator for building this house as a home-like setting for doing psychedelics. So it's like you have a rain shower, you have a comfortable bed, there's a nice bathroom, you don't have to go to a porta potty, you're just like hanging out in a comfortable space. How do you feel on the substance? And uh, obviously, it naturally led into trying mushrooms, and then we did ayahuasca together. I've done DMT, 2CB, other things. It's all kind of like the same thing for me at this point. It's just that space, whatever it is. Um, but I would say that the takeaway ultimately is getting out of my way with any kind of negative self-talk I had that prevented me from going for it with whatever that would be, you know? Just like a freedom. Because when you feel really good, then everything is open to you. And I suspect that many, many people don't feel good for whatever reason. And it changes how you think about everything in life. So to actually experience, even for a couple hours, like, wow, I just feel really good, then you're able to start to envision, like, wow, I feel really good. Like, what do I want? Like, it seems like I could do anything. So, very important.
Mm,
Yeah.
cool. Are there any other notable ways that those experiences changed you or shaped your life?
Uh, I mean, each to each his own with what substance they use. But I think depending on the circumstance, taking yourself on a ritualized journey with some medicine at particularly potent points in your life can be a good way to really kind of get everything else on the table and see like and how to deal with it. Like I lost my father unexpectedly 5.5 years ago, and I didn't rush to do psychedelics. I wasn't like I was definitely spending the time grieving. But what I did do 2 years after his death, like on the day of his death, was um, do MDMA at his house while I went through all of his things to clear it out. And it was amazing because we were like together again. It was undoubtedly like happening where um uh I was there, and he was there as well, but then there was this idea of like, well, your body was broken, so like why would you be here in your body? That doesn't make any sense. So like I'm having the healthy body, so like I'm the body that's holding your spirit and my spirit now. And we just had this like amazing experience together in this like pseudo physical form, emotional form way. And that was a very, very powerful experience, to do that. That brought a lot of like understanding and unity and okayness, you know,
Mm,
okayness to death.
beautiful. Do you have a strong intuition yourself about what happens after death?
Just this last weekend, actually, I was thinking about it. Currently, my best guess, and who the hell knows, I'm ready to be surprised. But this idea that the body is a radio, okay? It doesn't mean it's perfectly tuned as a radio because we have a lot of emotional, psychological blocks, but the body and the brain is like a radio tuning to the frequency of consciousness, which is like coming down from somewhere out of this realm, right? So the body's coming up, we're tuning to it, and we're creating this connection here, hopefully getting out of your way enough to strengthen that connection. And then when you die, the body just like shrivels and goes away, but the consciousness is still there, hanging out. So if we identify with the body more so, like your personality and your physical existence, like it's going to die, it'll be a big disappointment. But if you identify with the consciousness coming in from afar, that does not die. The signal is still here in the earth and permeating I don't know, whatever this realm is. And that feels really good. So thinking about it like that, I've always been kind of partial to death experiences. It used to haunt me so much, just the idea of like, oh my God, they're gone, or the squirrel on the road is hit by a car. Oh no. But in the recent years, it's been more like, oh, I don't think I'm just projecting my own suffering and insecurities. I really don't know. And since we don't know, why would I adopt the belief that makes me suffer? So this alternate idea, which may or may not be somewhat accurate, is like, no, like physical forms come and go. Death is happening at every moment. Somebody just stepped on an ant. Oh God. But the consciousness persists like forever. It's in the trees. It's in the mountains. It's in the ants as a whole. It's in the birds as a whole. And that has brought some comfort. And then it also reframes what and like how I think about my life and like what do I want to do while I'm here? I've had depressed moments in the past where I'm like, maybe I want to kill myself. Who cares? And so then you get up to that point and you're like, okay, should we do it or should we consider options? And then it's like, well, wait, before we do it, do you want to do it right now or do you want to maybe tomorrow, like one more day? And it's like, okay, we'll do one more day. So then another day comes and you're like, cool, you're going to do it now? Or are you going to do maybe one more day? And I'm like, okay, maybe one more day. And it's like, well, okay, maybe a couple days. Okay, we'll do a couple days. And it goes from there into this thing of, okay, from one day to a couple days to a week to a month to several months to actually, I'm just going to kind of stay alive because it's happening and it'll be cool whenever it's over. But for now, what do we want to do today or tomorrow or while we're alive? And that's brought a lot of freedom, which I would wish to impart on anybody, frankly.
And what would you say to somebody who was in that place of depression or suicidality right now, if you were to deliver a message to them?
I mean, I can't speak to everybody because everybody's having their own experience, right? But my best guess is for anyone who's feeling that way, check your conditioning because your beliefs are just beliefs and no belief is true. And if you're depressed and in that state, like your beliefs may not be accurate, meaning it's up to you. You could be in physical pain. Sure, that's really uncomfortable. You could be in psychological pain, also uncomfortable. And also some people, maybe it is their path. I don't know. But I wouldn't want anyone to be going through life under the wrong assumptions. That is to say, assumptions that make it worse, that cause more suffering, when everything is a frame of mind. And so, like, if you can make different meaning as to what is, that is more positive and constructive, then we should do that. It's a very delicate subject. I don't want to proselytize or anything, but check beliefs. And I know from my years of depression and frustration that my beliefs were inaccurate. I had negative thoughts about who I was. I had negative thoughts about what the world was. I had negative thoughts about how it was going to be. It was always going to be like this. And those were not true. And there were alternate perspectives. So a good exercise could be kind of like, you write down what you think is true for sure. And then you go through and you say, well, let's look at the exact opposite and let's look at how that's also true. And that helps to break out of this dualistic mindset of this is this way and not that way, which creates a separation that causes suffering, and to bring more of a sort of regenerative cyclical experience of like, actually, there is no one way or another way. It's all the ways. And it opens up the mindset to, to a greater understanding rather than a narrow view of it's just this. And that seems to be related to the whole psychedelic experience, which is to just broaden the perspective, which eases suffering.
Well said. I want to drill down a little more on the no belief is true thing, but before I do that, I did just want to say, with respect to death, I figured I'd just put it out there that my experiences have also led me toward a feeling of like death is not the end, and that there's some kind of release. I, I don't know, like you, I don't know what happens. I don't know if there's individual persistence, a persistence of any individual consciousness, or if it's a release into a super consciousness. I've certainly had experiences on 5-MeO DMT that felt a lot like dying and just felt like pure dissolution into formless God consciousness, God power, cosmic nectar, words completely fail in those situations. I will say I have found it useful recently to play with the idea that there is no individual continuity at all, because I think it can often be kind of a spiritual sedative in a way, or a way to make yourself feel better, to just kind of unquestioningly latch onto the reincarnation idea or the idea of soul persistence. And I feel like it's a good exercise to just ask yourself, what would it feel like if it just ends and there's nothing after this? Would I be okay with that? Am I living in a way where I'd be okay with that? And does fear come up if I tune into that? Because if fear comes up, maybe that's something for me to look at. So I've been finding it kind of useful just to play with that idea.
Yeah. My fiance, who is an amazing therapist and professor of psychology, tells me all the time that fear is made up, and that when you experience fear, you're experiencing the bounds of the ego. That fear is part of the ego construct. And so if you're experiencing fear, that tells you that you're in your ego. Which, easier said than done, but obviously since we're together, I'm like confronting it all the time when I experience fears. And it's pretty potent of like this idea that fear is made up. I mean, that's another thing to mention about the MDMA use, which is that all the fear inclinations like do not latch on. Like they just don't, it doesn't happen. You just don't feel afraid, period. Like you could contemplate fearful ideas, but they don't latch onto your system. They just kind of bounce off. And that is super powerful. What would it be like to walk around your home, like go to the bathroom, make a sandwich, but you're just like not afraid of anything. And if you were like, I could die right now, like, okay, that's a potent place to be. So I often check myself when I'm experiencing fear, even if it feels so real, because that's the thing that keeps us like limited and boxed into the ego separate self persona, which is not really how it is. And I mean, obviously there are many, many practices to constantly come up against it. I wouldn't recommend everybody get too caught up in the practices, but just holding the idea that fear may not be real. This is an interesting thought. You know?
Yeah, I feel like this connects to drilling down on no belief is true. So no belief is true is actually a quote from Jed McKenna, who's an author who had an impact on both of us. And so I'm curious to hear a little more about what the impact of Jed was in your process and what this phrase no belief is true means to you, if you could dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, the Jed books, Spiritual Enlightenment, The Damnedest Thing. If you haven't read it, it's the Bible for sure. And also, I think whoever the author is, as he's grown, he'd probably be like, oh, that book is shit, like whatever. But one step at a time. I think it's this idea that we are conditioned with the way that we speak and think, that there is truth, and there is, but it's not what you think it is. And so it's not like we can know what truth is, but we can know what is false. Right. And so when you remove what is false, all that you're left with is what's true. So rather than framing it as I am attaining truth, like I have to get somewhere or earn something to get to this truth. It's the other way. You have to get rid of all that is false as much as you can. And all that you're left with at the end of it is obviously what's true. It cannot be reduced any further. And that, as a computer science, like logical thinker, was so fascinating to explore because I love deconstruction. And so if you like sit down and make a list of all the things you think are true and then go through and deconstruct them, is it true? Can it be known if it's true? That's also very much the Byron Katie work, if you're familiar, of just like, is it possible to really know that this is true or not? And if the answer is no, well, then you're like, well, how do you feel when you believe that this is true? And you're like, well, not good. Well, there you go. So you're creating your own suffering by believing something that is not actually knowable to be true. So why would you do that? And then you go and you explore, well, who would you be if you didn't believe this? And what would life look like if this wasn't true? And then that starts to open possibilities that generally are much nicer. So, you know, um, I think it's fascinating because, if you look at human history and culture today and any time, like it's all based on belief. Everything is made up. Everything. Money is made up. National identity is made up. Country borders are made up. Language is made up. Everything is made up. And yet we are all in it as though it were always this way. And it's completely true and unquestionable. And, if you really look at it closely, which again, psychedelics can help, even just cannabis, all the edges start to blur, and then it becomes very clear, like, all this stuff is not necessarily true. And, when I believe that it is true, I don't feel good. So I'd like to maybe think about other beliefs that might be nicer. And that's it. That's it. That's the whole process. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that you're pointing to the indefinability of reality. Like, there is reality, there is truth. It's just not what you think it is, because thought just can't capture it, can't pin down reality. And one way I like to think about it is like every thought, every belief, every story, it's true in a certain sense. It's like you're experiencing it that way. That's a valid way that reality can be with reality. It's kind of true within its own context. It's like it's true as far as it goes. It just doesn't go all the way.
As it goes. Yeah.
There's this infinity that is all inclusive, and it includes all the stories, and it just radically transcends them. And so, yeah.
When I was thinking about, I'm really fascinated by cults because cults run the world, and cults are very powerful because they're based on belief. But cults only work because there is truth in everything that they say. Like, there's in every cult and religion and everything, there's truth. I mean, they're talking about the spiritual thing that you and I are talking about. However, there is a piece of it that warps and distorts it into a dynamic in which it's kind of disempowering to the cult follower, right? And that's where I'm like, well, no. Like, I'm all for a cult. I mean, everything is a cult. We can't help it. But when it's disempowering the follower, then what are we doing here? But I have to believe the reason why they work is because there is truth to it. And, if you look at so many of the major religions, Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, they're all saying the same thing. It's very true. I get it. But then each of them have their own version atop it, which is like, well, you need to do it this way, and if you do this, and if you don't do this, you're going to go to hell or whatever. And I'm like, well, no, that doesn't make any sense. Like, how do I know? I once had somebody tell me, who was a devout Christian, like many years ago, just like, because I was Jewish, I was going to hell. And I was like, this is the first I'm hearing of this. So how can that be true? This is the first I'm hearing of it. I've never heard of this. I'm already going to hell. It doesn't make any sense. There's no way to know. There's no way for them to know. There's no way for me to know. So why are we engaging in this intense belief? How does that help us at all? It doesn't. So it's it's very tricky experience. And my guess is, if anyone is at all conditioned to feeling small, which is the natural position of people in this world. You're not good enough. You're too small. You'll never be something. You don't know anything. You're just a regular person. That shield makes you susceptible to cult beliefs of any kind because you already don't think highly of yourself. And if you shift that and you actually think, I'm just as cool as anybody, I'm just not interested in that, or I'm not interested in that, or whatever, and there's no problem with me, I'm alive, I'm a human, then you are no longer susceptible to any of those beliefs because you're like, I'm not looking for a hole to fill. I'm not looking for a void to fill. I feel fine. And that may be the most powerful thing that is needed, uh, in every culture. Uh, I am fascinated with historical figures because there have been conscious, awake people the entire time, like thousands of years. They've always been there. And even people who are awake today are the same. It's the same voice that has permeated all of these years before because they're not conditioned by the language of the time or the cultural conventions of the time. And so it's not like this is like a new consciousness coming online today or a new spirituality. Like it's informed by our current societal woes, but enlightened people from 0 AD say the very same thing that they say today. And so when we reach that position, that framing of the mind, we're just tapping into the core of the human experience that transcends all time and culture. I mean, you and I could be alive in 1500 and having kind of the same conversation. Uh, it's a very different world out there. I mean, the mountains are the same, but the buildings are different. The money is different. The cultural beliefs are different. But here we are still talking about like, I don't know, unity consciousness or whatever.
Yeah, that's interesting. That last point you made, I wanted to drill more into the everything is a cult thing, but maybe before we go there, going more into that last point you made, I do feel like even if in only very subtle ways, awakened people across history have allowed their particular cultural system and religious system to color their expression and maybe even their understanding of what awakening is. And that's something that really fascinates me. I think you're right that there is a certain amount of universality, but like you said, the Hindus have a certain system and the Christians have a certain system, and so they'll always articulate it kind of through the language of their culture, and they may even bake certain ontological assumptions into their interpretation of what awakening is. For example, even the assumption that everything is consciousness. That's kind of a very
Yeah, nice.
Vedantic kind of idea, and that's been put forth by a lot of awakened people. And
Huh.
at the same time, I I find that I don't know that for sure, and I kind of like to be able to fluidly play with different possible ways that I can interpret my experience. Basically, I find myself just in this radiant presence, and I don't know what it is, and I could play with a frame of this is a billions of years old universe that emerged and evolved, and I'm the knife's edge of evolution on Earth, and and that can
Yeah,
become experiential if I play with that. Or I can try on the everything is consciousness frame, and that can become experiential. Or I can try on the emptiness frame, and everything can seem very weightless, very vaporous. And so
right.
any of these frames, they become experiential. I notice when you like repeat, kind of when you internalize them deeply, or you kind of play with them deeply enough. I wonder if you have any.
Oh yeah, totally. Well, one thing you actually said to me that I'm always remembering because you articulated it so well, which is the nature of duality in our language. When you say that something is one thing and not another thing, you create a polarity that's not actually there. And when you create a polarity, you sever the circularity, which is the unity experience. And it's just no good. It's just no good across the board. And so we have to check ourselves with the way that we use language. I mean, literally everybody in the world is conditioned with words, you know, and words create separation where there is none. We say something is hot or cold, light or dark, yes or no. But those are just labels of things that are not actually true. And so we're already locked in the very way that we are talking and reading into this system that is not accurate. That's not actually like when I say that's a tree. No, it's not. I don't know what it is. I really don't know. Um, So when I think about it like that, one paradigm that I often will share is, you take a look at a tree and you say, cool, how many leaves are on the tree right now? And the answer is, I don't know. I could count them, maybe, but then what constitutes a leaf? Like this little one that's growing? Oh, that one just fell. Oh, so that's dying. Is that leaf's about to fall? So the answer is that it's always changing and that it's no good to think about the leaves of the tree. That it's unknowable. It changes at any moment. But then you ask, how many trunks are there? Every tree has one trunk. So doesn't it make sense to focus on the trunk because that's definitely there and to let the leaves of life experience just be what they are? And instead of being the consciousness that lives on the leaf, on the knife's edge of reality, to just stay centered in the trunk of like, I don't know what this tree is. I don't know what this is, but I know that we are anchored here and that this is a channel to both the leaves out here and also to the roots on the underworld. And that's it. I'm just going to hang out here. And I think you could argue that a tree's consciousness would be kind of in the trunk in the beginning of the root system. That's where it is, which is where the seed was. And so we just let the branches and the leaves do its thing. Oh, the wind blows and a branch falls off. Okay, whatever. Oh, a root got cut because somebody, dug into it, whatever. But the trunk and the tree is holding firm, and that's where we'll stay in our conscious experience of self and life, because that seems to be true. It's unwavering, you know. And if somebody goes and cuts down the tree, then okay, then the consciousness fades away. That's it, you know?
Well said. I feel like if we could somehow communicate to children that language is not implying real separation, it's just implying differentiation, because we do see an obvious differentiation in this field of whatever this is, and we can,
Right.
and it's useful to be able to acknowledge that differentiation. But if we could kind of place this foundational frame of like, this is all an emanation of the same wholeness. This is all
Yeah.
wholeness, and we're just
Yeah.
using these words to point to different differentiated aspects that seem relatively coherent and consistent across space and time. But just don't forget that it's all emerging from the same tree trunk. That would
Yeah.
probably be a better foundational frame than random numberless objects in a random universe
Right.
bouncing off each other that are separate, somehow apart from the universe, which doesn't even make logical sense.
But you can see how it evolved over time, So people are trying to communicate. Like I found a dead animal that we can eat. It's down by the river next to the big tree. Like not down by the river next to the small tree, but to the big tree. Like, okay, it's all wholeness. I'd say it's here in life. That doesn't help. You have to go to there, look at the trees. One is bigger than the other, and be like, okay, it's the bigger one. But I think it's also a product of the way that we have schooling and our conditioning as a society, that we just get super caught up in bigger versus smaller and whatever that means. I mean, it gets hammered in so much that we lose all sense of wholeness and unity, and we just get caught up in this is this and not that. And before you know it, you're running like economics models that are completely divorced from reality. And good for you. I don't know. How does that help? So a return to a life before words, before separation, before duality and polarity, into um, an actual sensed experience of wholeness is necessary. And to go back to psychedelics, for example, with MDMA, if you can experience for a couple hours the lack of fear and wholeness, not the lack of wholeness, but wholeness and the lack of fear, then it becomes a lot more obvious. And if you've never done those things, it just seems like a very strange concept of like, well, how can one thing be and not be? I'm like, you'd have to, you'd have to see for yourself. That's the only way. So, uh, yeah, this could be what's happening now. It is, as it's always happened, but maybe on a bigger scale.
Could be.
Could be.
Going back to this idea that everything is a cult, I like that. And I like looking at the shadows of different cults, right? Because, I mean, when we think of cults, we usually think of the shadows, but we may not think about the shadows of certain cults that we are a part of. For example, the psychedelic community or the spiritual community, or even the Jed community and Jed's books and the cult around Jed has certain
Being a United
shadows
citizen,
and
being
yeah.
a U.S. citizen or a European citizen, that's a cult. It's all
Mm,
cult identity. So there's this individual identity of I'm Eric and you're Jordan and that means this thing. Then there's like the tribal cult identity of like I'm in this family or I'm part of this school or I'm part of this group of people, spiritual group. And then there's like the national community of like I'm part of this nation and like that's what this means and you're part of that nation and whatever. And I'm kind of interested in this emerging idea of today of transnational, which is like actually they're all made up anyway. Um, so what would it be like to transcend any of the group mentalities at any level and be equally individual self? I'm Eric, but also completely global. Like I'm also a human, and also even beyond that, I'm just a living creature. And also beyond that, I'm just something that's part of something else. Like, what does that do to beliefs when we do that? And how much of our beliefs are conditioned by the group identity that encapsulates the individual? Like, for example, I didn't realize until recently how much I was conditioned by being a US citizen. I think the US is cool. It's got a cool history. I'm really into it. I feel like I know my US history well. And at the same time, the more that I've studied it, the more I'm like, huh, this doesn't always resonate with me. And maybe no national identity could resonate with me. And maybe it's not like, oh, I just need to move to France and it'll all be better. It's just like maybe actually we should just get out of this whole thing entirely. So cults can be a huge educational tool. It's both a catalyst for creating movements and change that moves us in ways, and also has a limit. Like you were saying earlier, it's true within the bounds of the context. Like science, science is true until it's not true. We're like one proof away from actually this is all shit. Sorry, it was not true anymore. So until that's proven, we're really stuck in that space.
are there any shadows of the cult of psychedelics or the cult of spirituality or the cult of Jed that you would like to point out in this moment? Because I actually made a recent video actually about some of the shadows of Jed's work that I've noticed after
Oh
years
yeah.
of kind of reflecting on it. And I'm curious, is
Can
there
you give me one?
anything? Yeah, for sure. I mean, for one, I think he really over dramatizes the whole process, which is kind of natural since you're writing novels, but I don't think it has to be this extremely dramatic self-immolation where the price of truth is everything and you literally need to pour kerosene on everything you know and love and just burn all your sacred cows in this giant inferno.
Yeah.
I think there can be another way, which Peter Brown, another teacher I really appreciated, he passed away a couple years ago. He said, you don't have to deconstruct what is not true. Just go to what is true. Just hang out with the positivity, the actuality of this astonishing fact that this is here. And basically just let that seduce you.
Hmm.
Stay with the richness, the lusciousness, the juiciness of this effulgence, this fullness, and just kind of bathe in that and let that do the heavy lifting. That will just start to shift things
Yes,
for you.
yes. I look at you. I look at you that way. You are to me someone who specifically lives in that way. I mean, I've known you now for many years, 6 years, 7 years, and you're always that guy who's enjoying the abundance of the beautiful in life. And I've seen through you that it does, by being in that space, permeate into all of the darkness and shadow rather than focusing on the shadow and being, well, we have to figure this out, blah, 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 blah. Because staying in this abundant life view, um, it is a lot more powerful. I'm not saying that I do it as well as you. You're definitely always been living a much more delightful life, I think. But
I
but
have my dark times too, but
we all but
but
the
yeah,
focus
thank you,
on
my friend.
returning to the light
Mm.
is beautiful.
And I would also say I think Jed, he can kind of put forth and fixate this notion of life as meaningless and life as kind of solipsistic, and also fixate the notion of no self, which I now find to be kind of sloppy languaging in a way to say there's
Mhm.
no self, because quite clearly there's a psychophysical organism here that has a unique ambiance, a unique flavor. And, it seems like when people say no self, they're really just meaning no separation. There's this sense that you're like a separate observer who's apart from the universe. That kind of gradually melts away and you feel yourself to be at one, but there doesn't have to be an elimination of an honoring and an appreciation of individuality. I think it's fun to be a participant,
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Well, doesn't Jane have this other quote, like, before enlightenment, a mountain is a mountain, and during enlightenment, a mountain is not a mountain, and then after enlightenment, a mountain is a mountain again? Or is it? I feel like that's the nature of the self-exploration, is you are default conditioned that you are somebody and that everything matters. And then you go through the enlightenment process of like, wait, I don't think I actually exist. I think that what I think of as me is completely socially negotiated, and I can't even say for sure. And then the second part of that, which is often missing, I think, in a lot of spiritual groups, is like, no, you come back into self again, but you're not married to it in the same way that you were. You're like, I exist for sure as a self and not either way. But it's not like this hardened thing of like, I have to. And what I've seen in many spiritual cults is that they go back into the hardened self, but then they're like, I'm God. I figured it out. And I'm like, no, you're not. There's no way. Like, if you're God, then I'm also God. And there's no way that we're any different. So, cult of personality is where it gets super weird. There cannot be a cult around a personality. Persona is a mask to begin with. So, if you're idolizing some human or even a deity that is made into a personhood, obviously false, cannot be, because then it implies that you too, as a person, could also be God. What's the difference? What, this person talks to God and you don't? I don't think so. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would say you can find a devotional relationship with any kind of archetypal expression of divinity, and that can be very powerful actually for many people to bow down and worship a face of God,
Yes.
And at the same time, I would say as this process continues of noticing life and noticing wholeness, you just gradually start to become more of a non-dual bhakti, where it's like, I see that I'm not separate from that I'm worshiping. And still, though, maybe it's valuable to keep getting on my knees and humbling myself, because some of us who've done a few too many psychedelics need some humbling, because one of the shadows of psychedelics can be, as you say, the inflation, the grandiosity, the God complex, the guru complex. So,
I got to get out of that one. That's just what breathes both over again. It can't be. I also want to relay something that my mom told me a long time ago that I keep thinking about, which is that the most conscious people are invisible. Okay. So if you're truly conscious, like, you're probably just living your life and having a good time, and you don't need to talk about it and get on a soapbox. And so if there's somebody out there who is compelled to give talks and make podcasts and write books and to just hammer into this whole thing, you got to ask about, well, why? Why? Like, for me, the more conscious I get, the more closer to truth that I get, the more close to easefulness, the more I'm like, I don't feel compelled to tell anybody anything. I don't even know what's true. Who am I to say? I would like to spend my day sitting under a tree because I can, and that's nice. So, to anybody possibly listening, if somebody seems really compelling to you about whatever they're writing or sharing, you have to ask, why? Why are you sharing this stuff? Why are you spending your time doing this? And they're saying, oh, well, I'm here to help you. I'm here to awaken humanity. I'm like, no, you're not. You're full of shit. You have an ego agenda. Now, again, we live in a capitalist kind of society where you have to make money doing something, and that something is usually individuated and specialized. And so, okay, I'm a specialized healer, preacher, selling you these things. Okay, that's fine. But let's not mistake what's really happening. You're playing the capitalist game of ego and productization. There are millions of people alive right now who are totally enlightened and they're just having a good time, and you never heard of them. They're there.
Yeah, I would say in a profound sense, everyone is enlightened, and that reality is enlightened, and that this is already awake and it's functioning harmoniously.
Yeah. What if you went to a Tony Robbins seminar and you said that? You'd be like, well, no, you have to take my course, because then that's how
Yeah.
That's how you get bet
Yeah, I
another
mean,
40,000.
mm, I would, yeah, another $40,000. I would say, to me, every individual's expression is going to be different, just as, at any given time, every individual's expression is different. And so some people will feel called to just go sit under a tree or just continue to be a checkout clerk at the grocery store who you don't suspect has a heart of gold that's just bursting open.
Oh,
Or maybe you do suspect
oh,
it because they're smiling and they make you feel warm every time you go by
absolutely.
them, for
Hmm.
example. Or maybe they're a nondescript homeless person, or maybe they're, somebody like me, more of an artistic template, just has this kind of endless creative
Yes.
geyser and just like
Well, you
needs
particularly
to kind of
were,
give.
oh, yes.
I need to give life back. That's just kind of my function. I have to give it back somehow. It's like similar to breathing for me. It's just a very natural function. So I would say, that's uh, I did.
I have always
Yeah.
had deep respect and reverence for your artistic expression. I mean, in the retreats that we did, I feel like those were the highlight. Like, forget about all the spiritual talk about this and that, but like actually just being with you while you freestyle improv something is the experience, artistic expression of consciousness in the moment. I mean, you cannot sell that thing. Just to experience it is fantastic, which is why I also teach improv, because improv is experiencing the self as a flexible expression engine instead of being locked into this is Jordan and this is how Jordan speaks and what Jordan likes and dislikes. This is how Eric speaks and he operates this way. We are trying to cultivate a flexible self, flexi self, which is actually like method acting. Like, actually, I can tune into a different frequency of emotion and become this entirely different persona. And if you really get into it and you're trained enough to allow yourself, you can feel like a completely different person, and then it creates a very different perspective on what's true and what's not. And so, if that's the case, which is, then it questions the nature of who we are and what we're really doing. Who is expressing this? Who is expressing these views? Oh, I'm going to be someone different now. So playing with that. I mean, I could imagine like your daughter someday with her friends saying, "Did you know that in my parents' generation, they had one job their whole life and then they retired, and they had like one version of themselves their whole life and they retired? I've already been through 10 versions of me and I'm only 12." You know?
Yeah, I
So
love that description of improv. I was going to ask you about improv, so I'm glad that you went there. And
segue.
I feel like what you're pointing at is like the ability to be a shapeshifter, the ability to be fluid and not be boxed in. I've been really loving this term fluidity lately because I feel like that's
Mm.
what's opened up for me through my process, is just this fluid capacity to drift through reality's numberless scenes and flavors
Yeah.
and modes and be a shapeshifty blob that kind of assumes the shape of the container I'm placed in. Just allow whatever environment, whatever context to call forth the most
Yes.
auspicious and honest version of you that plays auspiciously with that context. And it might look wildly different in different contexts, but you don't have to be boxed into playing one character. It's like I have infinite versions of myself, and I've never met the same version of myself twice. I've never experienced the same version of myself twice because it's actually non-repeating. I've experienced is
Mhm.
non-repeating. It's just,
Yes.
I'm not the same person as the beginning of this sentence. It's just you
Mm.
haven't seen this exact expression of me. It's cool to notice
That's
that and
great.
just let yourself become more fluid.
Yeah, and you touched on something, which is that it's context dependent. So the nature of self being like water to fill the container that is created. So in this context, I'm this way. In this context, I'm this other way. And this context dependent experience of self is another really important aspect. Ooh, that is reminding me of the beginning of our chat around anybody who's feeling a little bit depressed and hopeless. It's like maybe your context is not the it's not the best context for you. You know, what do they say? If you judge a fish and how its ability to climb a tree, it will go through its life feeling inadequate. Yeah, well, if you're a fish and you're trying to climb a tree, like don't do that. Go to the water. In my case, in many situations from my past, I felt inadequate with the people that I was with. So the answer is, okay, go to different people. There's like a different world for you. The world is infinitely um, sized. Like when we say, oh, the world is 8 billion people, like we actually don't really know. Okay. It's a magic world. There's any number number of people anywhere. And I'm sure anybody can attest to the experience of like when you meet someone new and you're like, oh my God, this person is amazing. Holy shit, I'm so excited. That feeling is true for life in general. And it's not just that person, it's that feeling of, oh my God, things are not what I thought. Like there's a context outside the context that I've been in. And that is the call for expanding life and self perception, which is that there are many, many contexts that you can be in. And if you're not having a bad time in this context, like get out of your comfort zone and go find a different context because it's almost guaranteed that there is another place for you that is exactly where you should be. And then suddenly all of the ideas of feeling part of a tribe and being connected to source and all this, it all works because the people are matching that. Can you imagine taking like a Native American who was part of a native tribe and just like dropping them in the middle of like English society in Britain? Like it's probably not going to feel as good as they did when they were with their own people on the land. And yet, if they didn't know better, they could start to feel really horrible. Wow, I'm really not fitting into this British society. I really hate tea. I hate it. And that becomes their whole worldview is that they're just not good enough. When in fact, there was this whole other place for them in which they feel totally at peace and connected to everything. So that's a big one is understanding that the self is contextual.
And I would say one potential shadow of that, as someone who did the digital nomad thing for a lot of his
Yeah.
life and left home and went to go find the others and
Yeah.
did to a great extent. It's interesting that now that I'm married to a German woman and I have an international life and I can't easily just move home because now we're pretty well settled in Germany. We're rooted here for different reasons. This is our home now. I did have to go through a pretty big process of actually, when I had a child, it connected me to my family and my home on a new level. And I was like, all I want to do is just move home right now. I just want to go be with the original people who raised me and my oldest friends and my family members. And I couldn't do that. And so that was kind of a twisted irony of my path and something that I would advise people to keep an eye out for. And I accept it. It's my karma. Everything in life has trade-offs. Grass is always greener. Yeah, that's kind of the point, is that the grass is
Well,
always
you're not
greener.
dead yet. This could
And
just be what's happening right now. All things are possible.
yeah, for sure. Everything's possible. There will be other phases of life. We probably won't be here our whole life. And I'm in a place now of deep love for this place, deep acceptance. It's a beautiful place in many ways, great place to raise a child. But I did go through that, and it still comes up sometimes, homesickness. But
Yeah, I get that. You ever think about how, like, when we're kids and we grow up, like, our family is like parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles. It's kind of all the people that are like above you, surrounding you. But by the time we die, our family is the one that we made. you know that is always super weird to me because I love my parents, and I was definitely, when I was a kid, like mom and dad and grandma and grandpa and aunts and uncles. And now it's already shifted, and I can see more clearly, like, oh my God, like I could be like 85. My parents are long gone, my aunts and uncles are long gone, my grandparents are really long gone, and my entire world is like the world that I made with my friends and my children and their children or whatever. Suddenly, like, I could be like grandpa to like several people. And like, it's just so weird because it reminds me that how we think of ourselves is not fixed. We are in process. And so the reality of who Eric is or who Jordan is or who anybody is the fullness of our entire life. When I die, that is Eric, the entirety of it. And right now I am in transition. And I often will have experiences of channeling my future self, which is also my past self, because time may not be linear. And the totality of self is the realness. Um, and that any attachments I have to the way things were and the way they're supposed to be is not, as again, it's causing suffering. It's just a belief. And if I can tap into the fullness of my whole life, as a full circle, it's like, wow, like there's just so much richness in that. and in the continued change that occurs. You're feeling this way now, being in Germany with your wife and your child, and you're far from your family. One day, your family will not even be on the earth at all, and you're going to be a grandfather to your daughter's kids and whatever, and that'll be a whole thing. And that's also Jordan, you know. So let us not suffer in the sense of finality in this moment. It's not final. Things are constantly changing and growing. And when it's time to actually die, then you will know the fullness of your life. And only then.
Beautifully said. And it kind of reminds me of something I'd made note of earlier, which seems like a recurring theme in this conversation, is that you're mentioning like noticing what beliefs you're holding or what stories you're telling yourself about your situation, and potentially asking, are there more expansive or more beautiful stories or beliefs that make me feel better about this? And I was just going to make note earlier that I see that as kind of a magical process. Like that's one way you could think of magic, is like noticing that the deep code of our experience is coded by these symbolic architectures that are embedded in the deep psyche, and a lot of that code sucks. And if we can find ways to, even if you've had this explosive awakening to what is beyond the stories, you're still going to have stories coded in there. And so, if you can learn techniques to like drop new seeds into the deep psyche of new stories. And I think for me, rapping and listening to my own rap music as weaving new stories and then hearing myself speak those stories. A shaman once told me your own voice has a power to heal you that no one else's voice has. And so
Totally.
that for me is one of my favorite ways, I think, to recode my psyche. I wonder if you have any further thoughts on that as kind of a magical
I was just talking
process.
yesterday with a therapist friend who was telling me about how like many of our elders are running old software necessarily, and they haven't gotten the update. They haven't done like the Norton antivirus software. They have to defragment their hard drive. They have too many files on the desktop. They're operating in this Windows 1.0, and we have to keep upgrading the software every time. And that makes so much sense because uh, that is what is happening. And we're living in this techno world that's mirroring it in a way. And you can experience, like, if you were to go use an original Apple computer with OS version 3, like, it's a very different experience than today's tech with the iPhone, right? And there's this idea that if you were actually able to go back in time and talk to George Washington, you couldn't really talk to him because he's operating a very different software. Yes, they also speak a form of English, so there's something to be said, but the entire system, hardware and software, is so outdated. It's like Fortran. And yet, the technology that put the Apollo mission to the moon is so rudimentary compared to the iPhone today. It's still powerful, it still works, but we have to constantly be getting these upgrades and upgrades and upgrades. Um, and a good software upgrade will always simplify, simplify, simplify. And part of the issue with coding is often getting into a situation where you've over-featured so many times without rewriting the base that now you're in this situation where the software is so bloated with so many features. Things are written the same way several times to do this thing. And you have to actually rewrite the whole system now that you have a bigger understanding and be like, okay, actually what's happening is this, and we're going to rewrite the base of the system to be more flexible so that we can add all of these other features. And if you don't do that, it gets really cumbersome and bogged down, and it doesn't run as fast anymore. And before you know it, you're like, I can't talk about that. I don't know. I need to go watch TV. This is getting a tiresome discussion, you know? And you're like, oh, you need to defrag your system. Okay, that's fine. So yeah, we're just always getting updates. And every time we upgrade, we also have to rethink the base architecture and be like, okay, we've had enough upgrades now. It's time to rewrite the base system now that we know more about actually where the system is going. Oh, it's actually like this. Okay, well, we need to rewrite the architecture to support this thing. Okay, there we go. Now we're going to be good to go for the next few years of getting some new stuff. But if you don't do that, I don't think it's possible at a certain point. You're just like, you're stuck in Windows 1.
Nobody wants to be stuck in Windows 1.
Nobody wants to be stuck in Windows, period.
Mm.
Says an Apple person, but
Do you have time for two or three more questions, my friend?
yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
cool. This one's a little more pragmatic, you could say. I wanted to note that, in my view, you've built very solid life foundations for yourself at a relatively young age. And I'm wondering, what were the principles and what was the mindset that allowed you to do that?
I've never been popular, and I learned early on that being popular actually might be a curse because then you're subject to more judgments. Whereas if you're an outcast, then you're just on your own anyway. If you're popular, then literally you go in every day and people are like, oh my God, you're wearing that? Oh my God, did you see what this person's doing? Oh my God, we should do this thing. And it's just like, whoa, that is a lot of stuff coming in. Versus if you're an outcast and you're actually nobody's paying attention to you, then at some point, yeah, you could feel bad, like I did, about not being popular or not being in the in group. But then it becomes kind of freeing of like, well, then screw it. I'm just going to do what I want to do, which has been a driving force my whole life. I'm just going to do what I want to do. I don't really care what the book says. I don't care what the teacher says. I don't care what they say. I didn't come here for that. I came to do the thing that I want to do. And I feel that really strongly. So at every turn across my entire life, I have defied the rules. I have burned bridges. I have just done it my way. And it's been okay. I didn't burn anything that was meant for me. Um, so uh, that's been a thing of really staying true to what I feel called to do. I was also raised in a way that reinforced my sense of self. I know some people are not, depending on their families. I also came in with a strong sense of self. I mean, my kindergarten teacher was telling my parents that I beat to a different drum, and I have to do things my way. And I'm like, yeah, so let's just let's just do that. Um, and the fascinating thing about that is when I gave up the frustration and bad feelings about not fitting in and not being able to play by the rules and not being one of the group, and I just did my own thing, I noticed that heads turned, which I say this like this because it's kind of frustrating because it's like you think, oh, they'll never look at me, they'll never accept me and appreciate. But then as soon as I actually just tune into my own thing and I just go full steam ahead without a care, then suddenly I start attracting people who are like, hey, that's cool. Oh wow, I really like that. That's cool. So who are you? What are you doing? Literally all my people in my life today are because I left the conditioned world, the tech Ivy League world that I was in, and I went on my own journey, and all these people showed up who are awesome, who appreciate me as I am and not like for how I fit in. And that is freaking magic. So I definitely support that view of like, if you feel like you're not being seen and you don't fit in, probably because you're not supposed to fit in, go do your thing. What do you want to do? When you go pursue those things, all the other people will come in, including my fiance, who literally walked in my front door after I built this house.
Wow.
Yeah.
And and at the same time, you had mentioned earlier in the conversation that early in life you made a choice to optimize for, you noticed something wasn't going to make money, like architecture, and you were like, I'm going to optimize for money for a while for more freedom. And so I wanted to ask about economics and ask, there's a lot of young people feeling overwhelmed by the state of the world, kind of unsure how to proceed in this economy. Do you have any idea what you would do if you were kind of starting over as a teenager and navigating the space?
The world that we're living in now is just a more intense version of what it was when you and I were kids. Okay. I specifically remember Spanish class senior year. I'm sitting with my friends around and we're talking about like what schools we're applying to. And I'm freaking out because I'm like, oh my God, this is such a big decision. Like the school that you pick depends on like so many things. It's going to have a big impact on your outcome, like what kind of job you're going to get, who you're going to meet. Oh my God, how is anybody supposed to choose? And they're like, Eric, calm down. Like, yeah, you're over dramatizing. And I'm like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. Especially because nowadays, like so many people are going into debt to go to college for a supposed degree that's going to get them the job that's going to pay back the debt and then some, which doesn't happen. So that doesn't make any sense anymore. What I want to optimize for is freedom. I think I'm one of the freest people that's ever lived. And there are many, but what does that mean? Free, I still suffer from fear like anybody, um, I'm still oppressed in that I can't go skiing every weekend. Not that I ski, but like there's all these levels. But what I want to optimize for is time and space. I was so frustrated going to school the entire time that I had to get up and go to school and that I had to do these assignments and that I had to like follow these protocols. I did them. I got A pluses just to show them, like, I did your assignment. I got an A plus and I still hate this. So how long until we get out of this? And then there was this idea. It's like you go to high school, then you go to college, then you get a job, and now you're going to the job every day. And then you have to do the projects at work. And I'm like, oh my God, are you telling me that it just keeps going forever? Like that is not the life that I want. And both my parents ran their own businesses. They also designed and built their own homes. So that's in my lineage. I'm not saying it's for everybody, but I have been doing what is called to my particular brand of existence. Um, and they were also both financially like responsible. My dad told me nobody is going to care about your finances more than you. And it is very important to know that. It's up to you to decide what you want for yourself. I'm not saying you need to make a lot of money to go skiing every weekend and have a fancy car. That is many ways a crutch. I mean, so many people who have big houses and cars are leveraging it. They are indebted to pay for those things. So you buy it and then you have to pay for it every month. And so you have to make that money. That sucks. I don't want that. Maybe somebody is called to actually live a really simple life and they move to India and they live in a barrel like Epictetus and they're just living the best life ever because there's no oppression. I mean, I think that's the question is like when we consider like, oh, I want to get this house, I want to get this job, I want to have this life. What does it take to be that person? What kind of life do you live? What is it like when you wake up in the morning? And if you like it, if you like getting up at 6:30 and commuting to an office and working on a project and being at the forefront of this industry, like then go do it. I was there with those people. They loved it. I mean, many people in the tech space, they loved it. And I was there noticing like, wow, this is fun for you. Like you love this. And this is just like a means to an end for me. Like I like it, but I don't want to be doing this forever. So again, that's for me to know. But overall, it's just worth questioning. Like, if you want to optimize for flexibility and freedom, then your life is probably not going to look like what you think it is, because what you think it is conditioned by the narratives that created all of the frameworks that we're operating in, you know? Um, so that's it. I just wanted to optimize. What was interesting is during my post-tech journey, okay, I was like leaving the tech world, and I didn't yet have enough money to build a house. And so I'm like, okay, well, I have to do something else. I don't think I can go back in there. Oh my God, that was really traumatizing. So like I'm like going around exploring like what else I could do and like what the world is actually like. And it was several years of trying different things. I mean, I worked in media, I worked in theater, I worked in publishing, and I was just like, none of this is really calling to me, right? But as the circumstances worked out for me, I basically was like, all I really want to do is just build a house. And that's all I've ever wanted to do my whole life. Uh, and build a business around the house, which is to say, build a house so that I could generate income to pay for the house. 'Cause once you own a house, you have to pay property taxes, insurance, utilities. Like, so where can I build a house where the property taxes are low? How can I build a house so that other people could pay me to help cover those costs? So it's like, okay, Boulder has lower property taxes compared to other places, although they're growing. And also, it's a communal house with many bedrooms designed in a way that I can rent rooms to people. I can rent the event space. So now I'm offering that to people, and it's a win-win. They get this place, and I get help to pay for it. So now I'm freed up. I am not necessarily tied to having to have a specific job to keep paying for this thing. And I work for our family business. I've been doing it for many years. It's my mom started it. It's fantastic. So it's another part of my particular life path that feels really natural. But the point being that everything was like strategically planned to optimize once again for flexibility and freedom. That's not to say least responsibility. I have a lot of responsibility. Sometimes it gets to me, but my capacity for responsibility has grown along with it, right? And so, like the younger version of me, when he thinks about, oh my God, how do you build a house? How do you manage the build process? How do you pay those bills? And what if there's an issue? I'm like, yeah. Don't worry. You're going to grow into it. It's not just going to be like you doing it one step at a time. That's why I was able to buy other houses and renovate with my same build team. It's like, I know how to do it now. Like the capacity has grown. So never discredit and discount like how you can grow in the path. The you that envisions a life you want is not the you that's living that life. You will change and grow in that process. And I just say, continue to make sure that it's fun, that it's what you want to do, and that you're not doing something because you think it's going to get you somewhere that's not guaranteed. It's a belief. It may not be true. Stick to what actually feels accurate. And look at your lineage, look at your parents' lives, look at their parents' lives. Assess why you came into this body in this family. Like, what is it offering you that it's not offering that guy over there? What do you have going for you that's outside the conditioning? Everybody has something. Everybody has something. So, like, that is there to help you co-create life. It's not you alone against the universe. The universe is also providing a lot of stuff. And if you're too far into conditioning about what you're supposed to do or who you're supposed to be, you could be neglecting all that is actually given to you for your particular life, you know?
Well said. Yeah. I think if I was going to drop a couple principles in there for young people who might feel overwhelmed or something, I would just say, trust the process, follow your curiosity. Like you're saying, follow your excitement, what actually feels delightful. Become a lifelong learner. Like you're saying, you can continuously grow and change and adapt throughout life, and becoming adaptable and being able to teach yourself anything, that's going to be one of the most valuable skills of the future because we're in such a rapidly changing landscape. Yeah. Flexibility, fluidity, and I would say just get out there and start doing something. When I look at your life, you dove in, you started doing a lot of things, and it's through that experimentation process that we learn who we are, we learn what we don't really want to do the rest of our lives, and we start to dial in on our niche that really feels like, okay, this is what I was born to do. So you have to dive in and start doing something. You can't think your way to the answer. So,
right now, the actual act of doing is itself a healing process. Okay? Like, for people who get caught up in the healing practices, oh, I have to meditate more. And you're just like meditating all day. Like, no, do a project, do something. As you're building something, you're playing music, you're writing a book, you're coding a website, whatever it is, like the process itself will be challenging. And overcoming those challenges is the way through. When I went into college, I had zero programming experience. I've never programmed anything in my life. In fact, the computer science I took freshman year, I got a C plus because I'm just like, I have no idea what this is. Now, I'm not meant to be a big computer science engineer solving the world's AI problems, but I was able to dive in from my own interest into programming at the time, making websites and apps, and take that into a career in Silicon Valley where I'm literally talking to the billionaires of today back then. And I'm like, man, does anybody know that I'm kind of like not supposed to be here? These guys were like programming and building computers as soon as they came out of the womb. And I'm like, cool, yeah, I just like made this site, right? But I had no idea. I remember spending an awful lot of time in college by myself, just building lots of websites and like going through the challenging of how does this work and figuring this out. Oh God, that bug doesn't work. And I'm thinking, God, I bet everybody else is out there at parties having sex and I'm just like here not doing anything. I hope this pays off. And it did. So that's another call that if you are pursuing your own curiosity, it's not saying that it's easy. It'll be hard as well. But like, what else would you be doing? Like, if this is it, then this is it. Don't think about how you could be doing this other thing. This is what you want to do. You never know where it will lead. It could lead to all kinds of fantastical things. I still today cannot believe how many like superstar people I have interacted with in my former career. And even today, I still meet superstar people. And I'm like, oh my God, little old me from Connecticut, like ended up hanging out with these people, amazing creators of our time. Not because I am them, but because I am also capable of following my curiosity and bringing skill to to be in the same room. Just FYI, you never know. I think about who I might still meet in my coming years. Like, who the hell knows? Could be anybody. But I'm not going to do it because I think I should. I'm going to do it because this is what I'm called to do, you know? So another call to just do your thing. Don't worry about what anybody else is doing. Even Steve Jobs used to say that. He says, we don't build products based on what we think people will like. We build them because we like them. I don't know if that's what Apple does today. He's dead. But back in the day, it was very much the case. They just didn't pay attention. They're like, I don't care. That's crap. We're going to build this because we think it's awesome. Well, here we are.
I love that. Do your
Oh,
thing. Nothing to do but be you.
and
Nothing to do but
yeah,
be you.
yeah.
I thought maybe a fun note to end on, since we talked about improv and freestyling, might be to just improv a little bit and freestyle something, just see what comes forth. If we just kind of have like a play dialogue, a play exchange, adopting any character can shift characters partway through. Are you open to that?
I don't know if I can do it on command with you, but I was going to ask you if you would, because you have the natural skill to just freestyle whatever right now. Perhaps you could freestyle.
You're good at improv too, though. I feel like you should say something, but if you don't want to, that's okay. I can freestyle. I can freestyle.
Yeah. Improv that I teach is an ensemble. It's a group dynamic, you know. So it's a different kind of thing than just like jumping into a character right now. But your freestyling skills are second to none. So perhaps you could drop in, and do a little quick freestyle rap about summarizing our chat.
Ooh, summarizing the chat. Okay, that's an interesting
original
challenge.
AI right here. Okay.
All right, so follow your curiosity, allow the software to update and percolate, feel the unicity. The mystery is right here. The universe is updating itself in every moment. I rearrange and allow the most potent, most high to electrify the skies as I simply arrive now, here again. I'm at the Now House with E-Fish. I might just be a fish made of water in the middle of the ocean. Okay, it's so potent. Shout out Jed McKenna, you wily trickster, just doing my thing with flows that's off the Richter scale. I had to bring the type of stuff off the top of the brainstem cranium, whatever lyrical uranium. We talking about the spiritual, the psychedelic, the entheogenic, the MDMA, the cannabis. Okay, it's just another partay, just another day in the life of the infinite celebration that just keeps going. Let it bowl you over, let it seduce you, let it electrify, mystify, open your eyes so wide that you could just see and realize every moment's like a clear blue sky, my child. So trust the process. Let the flow flow you. The aliveness alives itself. You could just be the fluid nectar shape shifter that adopts the style of its own container as we all flow along on this wild, wavy journey on love.
My gosh, thank you. That's like your gift to me for talking to you. I just love that stuff. Isn't he great? Oh my God. Fabulous.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you.
Fabulous.
Thank you for the chance. Yeah, that was cool. That was fun. And yeah, thank you for sharing your time and energy with us. I think this was a really beautiful and valuable conversation. So thank you for sharing your wisdom.
I always love chatting with you, fellow brother, mystery brother, on this strange experience of reality.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, my friend, and take good care. And yeah, much love.